Story 1. I work in the apparel industry, and one of our customers is a company that frequently appears on lists of the top 10 in the Americas. From our location, one of their massive distribution centers is only about 90 minutes away. Once, when we had a very small order for them, only about 10% of our minimum order quantity, we thought, instead of shipping it through ExpressX, why not just drop it off at their distribution center since the shipping address was already to their DC? It would arrive faster than by ExpressX and be cheaper too. So, we sent our driver there, but the distribution center refused to accept the delivery. No big deal, we thought. We contacted the person in charge on their side to explain the situation. However, this person was extremely rude and simply said, "We do not intend to accept any deliveries made other than through the contractual method of using ExpressX." They then fired off multiple emails to our vice president, and even the CEO of our holding company, complaining that we weren't following the contractually required methods. So, our driver returned, and we shipped the product using ExpressX. Fast forward about 3 weeks ago, we received a frantic call from them for a large, urgent order. We provided our time estimates to complete the work and confirmed a shipping date, all agreed upon via email. Despite the urgency and their request to use any means necessary to get the shipment to them by the agreed date, we still shipped it through ExpressX because of their previous insistence on following the contract. When the shipment didn't arrive on time, the enraged phone calls began. There were screaming matches, even between our holding company's CEO and their vendor manager. Our CEO eventually went over the manager's head and complained directly to their purchasing and inventory vice president. We explained the situation and highlighted the previous email from their manager about only using ExpressX, which we had followed to the letter. The trailer was packed, sealed, and ready by the agreed-upon date. The delay was due to the ExpressX semi not arriving until 1 a.m. to pick up the trailer, not our fault. The result? They just lost 9 major university football teams from their vendor management portfolio. Story 2. I work as a loss prevention agent at a warehouse that processes lost mail orders. We handle everything from car parts to gun parts, expensive jewelry, and pretty much anything else people might order online. Once a week, the warehouse opens to the public to auction off these items. Most of the time, I'm in the security office watching the cameras, while other members of my team, which includes off-duty police officers, handle the floor. Occasionally, I work outside on the floor or in the parking lot if we're short on security for the night. Since this is a rough part of town, and the warehouse offers huge discounts on high-value items, we get a lot of different types of people. Many of them are regulars who attend the auctions weekly and know how things work, making them easy to deal with. However, we also get newcomers who think they can throw their money around and bully anyone who bids on something they want. This story takes place on a night when I was working in the parking lot, directing traffic. The lot wasn't designed to handle the amount of traffic we get on auction nights, and our biggest problem is people trying to park in the employee parking area. This is where entitled customer Ek comes in. He speeds through the parking lot, completely ignoring the foot traffic of customers making their way in, and zooms past me as I'm standing at the entrance to the employee parking lot, as if I wasn't even there. Ek gets out of his Mercedes SUV with his family, with a look on his face that screams, "I'm entitled to everything, and no one can tell me otherwise." I approach him and say, "Excuse me, sir, you can't park here. This area is reserved for employees. You'll need to find a spot somewhere else." EC responds, "Who are you to tell me where I can park? How do I know you're not just trying to save it for someone else?" It's worth noting that I'm wearing a full security guard uniform, which includes a polo with the company name and the word security printed on it, a duty belt with a taser, handcuffs, my badge, and my firearm. As I mentioned, this is a rough part of town, and we've had multiple attempted break-ins. I reply, "Sir, I'm security here, and I'm telling you that you cannot park in the employee lot." EC, still dismissive, says, "Yeah, right? You're just trying to scam me out of my spot." At this point, I'm starting to get irritated. I have a short fuse when dealing with guys like this, a trait I blame on my time in the Marines. I raise my voice a bit and say, "Sir, you need to move your vehicle now." EC seems a bit taken aback, probably because no one has spoken to him like that in a long time, if ever. Realizing that I'm not just some random guy trying to harass him, he switches tactics. "Well, I don't see any other cars here, so where are these employees?" he asks, using air quotes. At this point, I've had enough and drop any remaining tact I had. "I don't really care what you can or cannot see. I told you to move your car, so you will move it now, or it will be towed." X sneers and fires back. "Try it, rent a cop. My dad is a retired police officer, and he knows every cop in this city. I'll make your life a living nightmare." As I mentioned earlier, we have off-duty police officers working with us, and one of my team members is a retired detective who is on the city's police department board. We have a great relationship with the police department, so I wasn't worried at all. I calmly reply, "Well then, you can have him call the impound lot after your car gets towed." By this time, my voice had gotten louder, and other customers were starting to stare. X scoffs, heads back to his car, and says, "You've made a huge mistake. Rent a cop. Have fun in jail tonight." He then speeds off again, nearly hitting me in the process. I took down his license plate number and planned to report him to the police for his reckless behavior and for nearly hitting me, which was all clearly captured on the camera footage. Update: a police report was filed that night, with video evidence attached. The police tracked him down by his license plate and picked him up from his house. He spent the night in a cell and is now facing charges of attempted assault with a vehicle, as he intentionally tried to run me over. I'll keep you updated if there are any further developments. Story 3. So, get ready, because this one's a bit of a ride. Let me tell you about my old roommate, who I'll just call Loony Lucy. She was the absolute worst messy, constantly stealing my food, and even ruining my clothes by borrowing them when they clearly wouldn't fit her. But, for a while, I managed. I kept my space clean, started storing my food at work or my boyfriend's place, and even installed a lock on my bedroom door to stop her from stealing my outfits. She wasn't great to live with, but she was quiet at night, so I put up with it. Everything was manageable until she broke our cardinal roommate rule: no one gets a key to the apartment without both roommates agreeing. I couldn't even give a key to my boyfriend of over a year. Without telling me, Loony Lucy met some guy online, and after only 2 weeks of talking to him, she invited him to stay over for the weekend. The kicker: she mailed him a key to our apartment because he was arriving before she got off work. Yes, you read that right. A stranger I didn't know, who she had only known for 2 weeks online, now had a key to our shared apartment, and she wouldn't even be home to greet him. But guess who was home? Yep, me. I'm in the middle of doing laundry, wearing only my robe since I was about to hop into the shower. Suddenly, I hear the front door unlock. I freeze as this creepy-looking guy in a trench coat walks in. He just stands there, not saying a word, while I'm standing there like a deer in headlights. Creepy guy steps forward, and that snaps me out of it. I scream at the top of my lungs and chuck the laundry detergent at his head. I scramble into my room, slam the door, and lock it. Creepy guy yelling, "It's okay, I'm Loony Lucy's boyfriend." Me shouting through the door, "I don't care who you are. Get out, or I'm calling the cops and my 6'4" boyfriend." To his credit, creepy guy left. He even locked the door behind him. Poor creepy guy. I call Loony Lucy, asking her if creepy guy is her boyfriend, and if she gave him a key. She says yes, and starts gushing about how they met. I hang up on her mid-sentence and call my actual 6'4", built like a tank boyfriend. He comes over, we pack up my essentials, and I move in with him that very day. We weren't planning on moving in together yet, but thanks to Loony Lucy, it seemed like the right time. The next week, when my boyfriend and I go back to get the rest of my stuff, Loony Lucy is there, and she's not happy. No apology, no excuses, just anger. She starts yelling at me. "Loony Lucy, This is your fault. You overreacted. Your lucky creepy guy didn't press charges for the concussion you gave him. Now, I'm usually slow to anger, but this was it. I was furious. I decided then and there that Loony Lucy needed to pay. So, here's where the fun begins. The lease was in my name, only because Loony Lucy's credit was so terrible that no decent place would take her. She had been living with her parents for months before we started rooming together. I could have just evicted her, but that wouldn't have been nearly as satisfying. Instead, I posted a roommate ad online, offering quite the deal. I'd keep my original deposit on file and pay the first 2 months' rent and sublet fee, on the condition that the new roommate knew they were moving in with a food-stealing, clothing-destroying, messy nightmare. I wanted revenge, not to trick some poor soul into living with her. After a few weeks of responses, I got a message from someone I'll call Kevin. Kevin didn't care about the food stealing because he orders takeout all the time and hates leftovers. He also wasn't worried about Loony Lucy borrowing his clothes for obvious reasons. In fact, Kevin admitted that he's a huge slob, and not having to clean was actually a plus. Kevin, the 2 months of rent seems a bit much. There's got to be more to the story, right? So, I told Kevin the whole saga with Loony Lucy. He said he'd take the deal, but had something to share. Kevin, I'm very active in the singles scene. I'm not looking to settle down, but I do bring people over. Sometimes they stay for days or weeks, so the key rule won't be a big deal for me. I told Kevin he sounded like a great match for Loony Lucy. Kevin moved in, and sure enough, I got a frantic call from Loony Lucy, saying a strange man had shown up and claimed he lived there now. Me, yep, he does. I subletted my half of the apartment to him. Enjoy. She started screaming at me, but I hung up and muted her calls. Over the next few days, I got tons of voicemails, some angry, some whining, some begging. Apparently, Kevin is a slob, and Loony Lucy has been forced to clean and take out the trash for once. She can't move out because her credit is still bad, and her parents won't let her move back in. To top it off, she has to keep paying her half of the rent, or Kevin threatened to change the locks and throw her stuff out. A few weeks later, Loony Lucy called again. This time, I picked up. Loony Lucy, you have to do something. Kevin is bringing home different guys every couple of nights, and sometimes they don't leave for days. Me. Yeah, having a roommate who hands out keys to random guys you don't know sucks, doesn't it? Click. Story 4. A few weeks ago, I started noticing that random things were disappearing from the bed of my truck. It wasn't anything super valuable, but still, stuff I used regularly: an old tarp, some piping, bungee cords, and the straps I used to secure loads. At first, I thought maybe I had just misplaced them, but then it kept happening, and I realized I had a thief on my hands. So, I went and talked to a few of my neighbors to see if anyone had noticed anything strange. One of them told me he had seen someone hanging around across from the corner of my street late at night, a few days in a row, but he didn't seem to think much of it. Apparently, the guy didn't look suspicious enough to be worth worrying about. Not exactly the info I was hoping for, but it was a start. Since the thief wasn't taking anything too valuable, I wasn't too worried, just annoyed. I mean, who steals an old tarp and some bungee cords? But then I got an idea. I had seen all those popular videos online where people prank package thieves with glitter bombs or fart spray, and I thought, why not take it a step further? I wanted something disgusting, something that would make this guy think twice about stealing from me again. After rummaging around, I found 2 containers I didn't care about: an old toolbox with a busted latch and a cheap lockbox I used at garage sales. They were perfect for my plan. I started by taping a note inside the lids of both boxes. It read, "Since you seem to enjoy stealing my stuff, I hope this was worth your time." But that wasn't the best part. The next time I needed to use the bathroom, instead of heading to the toilet, I decided to, well, take care of business inside the containers. Yep, I dropped a couple of turds in each one. After that, I locked the cash box for good measure, and for the toolbox, I used a measly zip tie to keep it closed. I threw in some nails and screws into one of the drawers to make it sound like there were actual tools inside when moved. Then, I placed both boxes back in my truck bed, right in plain sight, and went to bed. The next morning, both boxes were gone. It was like Christmas morning, but for my thief, I couldn't help but laugh, imagining him thinking he had scored some valuable tools or something, only to open the boxes and find human waste. Since then, the guy hasn't been seen for over a week. I guess stealing 2 boxes of literal crap was enough to make him rethink his life choices. I can only imagine his face when he opened them. Honestly, I found the whole thing pretty hilarious. Still, I've decided it's time to stop being lazy and move everything from my truck bed to my house. And yeah, I'm definitely looking into a home surveillance system now. But hey, at least the guy didn't take anything valuable. Sure, he got a cheap lockbox and a toolbox that was barely holding together, but let's just say, he got exactly what he deserved. He wanted to steal my stuff, so I gave him some, well, crap. Problem solved. Story 5. This happened way back in 1986, when I was 21 years old, working at a gas station connected to a certain grocery store chain in Washington state. Although the gas station wasn't owned by the grocery chain itself, it had locations at nearly every store. Back then, it was a cash-only gas station, no debit or credit cards. Customers would pull up, pump their gas, and then come to my window to pay. We also sold cigarettes, but that was it, no drinks or snacks. Customers couldn't even enter my booth. After working there for about a year, the company announced they were closing our location. My manager and I were offered positions at another gas station upstate, and we both accepted. We moved our families and started our new jobs as new hires all over again. This new location was incredibly busy. In an 8-hour shift, we did more business than my old station did in a week. The setup was different too. Cars would enter from a single entrance, pump their gas, and then drive forward to a single exit where the Pay Here booth was located. There were always 2 cashiers on duty, each with their own cash drawer. One thing to note, there were no computers back then. Closing down the cash drawers between shifts was a tedious process. We had to manually count the cigarettes, cash, and the gallons sold from each pump. The total sales of gas and cigarettes had to match the cash in the drawer. I should mention that in the year I worked at the previous location, I was never off by more than 10 cents. The day after my first shift at the new location, the manager called me in. "Manager, you were short $50 yesterday." Me, impossible. "I balanced out my drawer yesterday." Manager, you must have stolen it after finishing the paperwork. Me, no, I didn't. He gave me a verbal warning, saying if it happened again, I would be fired and the missing money would be deducted from my paycheck. Over the next 5 days, I started realizing something was off. My old manager, now just a regular worker, was also accused of stealing. Another new employee was accused too, though I'm sure she didn't do anything wrong either. Interestingly, none of the employees who had been at the location before this manager arrived were ever accused of anything. I dug a little and found out this manager had only been there for 6 months, and only new cashiers were being accused. During those 6 months, the station had been having stealing problems and high turnover with new employees. Then, on Monday morning, I was told I was being fired. "Manager, you stole $500 from your drawer last Friday." Me, "You're only telling me this now. You worked Saturday and Sunday, didn't you?" He said he only discovered it that morning. I was pretty mad but didn't argue. Instead of going home, I parked in the grocery store parking lot and decided to watch the gas station. I knew the manager would take the cash to the bank for the weekend deposit at 9 a.m. sharp. Sure enough, at 9 a.m., he left the gas station with the cash. But instead of going into the bank, he walked into the Indian casino next door. It wasn't a full-blown casino, just a betting parlor for races, with some slot machines. Me, well, this is interesting. He stayed for exactly an hour, then walked next door to the bank to make the deposit. I knew I was onto something. For the next 5 days, I followed him every morning. Each time, he went to the casino before heading to the bank. I even took pictures of him entering and leaving both places. By day 3, my old manager had been fired for stealing $150. I knew something had to be done. I got the photos developed and noted the times and dates on the back. Then, I called the gas company's main office. It was after 5 p.m., but luckily, someone was still there. I explained the situation, and the person on the phone transferred me to someone they thought could help. By some stroke of luck, I was speaking to none other than the president and CEO of the company. Me, I didn't steal anything from your company, but I can prove who did. He took down my information and promised to be in touch. I wasn't sure if he'd actually follow through, but I kept watching the station the next day. At 9 a.m., the manager left for the bank as usual. But when he came out of the casino at 10 a.m., 2 men approached him. One of them flashed a badge, and the other started talking. The manager went pale and took a step back. Next thing I knew, they escorted him to a car and drove off. I lost them at a traffic light, so I headed back to the gas station. Within minutes, they returned, and shortly after that, a police car pulled in. The officer spoke with the 2 men, then put the manager in handcuffs. That afternoon, the president of the company called me. "President, the manager has been arrested for embezzlement. He's been stealing company money to gamble at the casino. In 6 months, he managed to take about $5,000. It turned out he would gamble with the store's cash. If he won, he'd make the full bank deposit. If he lost, he'd claim the cash drawer had come up short and blame the employees. I received a nice check as a reward, and my old manager was offered the position of station manager. I declined the offer to return, as I had already found a better-paying job elsewhere. As for the gambling manager, he was sentenced to a year in jail and ordered to attend counseling for his addiction. His wife divorced him, took their kids to California, and his house was foreclosed. Lesson learned: don't accuse me of stealing. I will get my revenge." Story 6. My mother is the most obnoxious person you could ever deal with. She's arrogant, condescending, and just won't get off her high horse no matter what. Honestly, the moment I could, I found peace in leaving her behind and going off to college. On top of everything, she married into a wealthy family and got filthy rich overnight. But even with all that money, she wouldn't help anyone in the family, not even in emergencies. As I said, my sister and I did everything we could to get away from her as soon as possible. No one in the family liked her. She's a know-it-all, always telling you what to do and demanding it get done right now. Basically, she's a typical Karen, but with money and authority. In stark contrast to our Karen of a mother, we had our aunt the complete opposite. She was the nicest person you could ever meet. It made you wonder how 2 such different people could come from the same family. My sister and I loved visiting our aunt, especially after we got out of our mother's house. When we were younger, we weren't allowed to visit her because she lived in a somewhat shady neighborhood, and my mom didn't want us to catch a disease. And by disease, she meant poor people's habits. A little before Thanksgiving, my aunt called me and invited both me and my sister to her place for Thanksgiving dinner. She said, "It's not much, but it's best to spend the holiday with family and those you love." I had no other plans. I'm a 22-year-old single guy, and I wasn't up for anything special on that day. Plus, I definitely wasn't going to celebrate with Cinderella's evil stepmom. My sister needed a little convincing since she had been thinking of hosting it that year. But when I called her and told her about our aunt's invite, she agreed and postponed her plans to next year. About a week later, I got another call, but this time it was from my mom. She demanded that I come home for Thanksgiving because she felt generous enough to have her private chef make dinner for us that night. It felt really good to tell her, "No, that won't be happening. We're going to aunt's this year. Me, my sister, and the rest of the family are meeting there, and we're going to have a great time." She lost her mind. She started calling me names and said, "How dare you imply your poor aunt is worthy of hosting Thanksgiving over me?" She demanded I cancel my plans and come home instead. My answer was simple: "No, I've made up my mind, and I'm not changing it. Period. Of course, she hung up on me. Later, I found out that my sister got a similar call and gave her the same answer. My mom flipped out again and hung up on her too. A few days later, I got another call from my mother. I hesitated to answer, but I figured it might be an emergency. Despite everything, I'm a somewhat decent person, probably thanks to my dad's influence. The first 5 minutes of the call were just her ranting about what a terrible son I was for refusing her invitation, more like order to have dinner with her. But when she realized I wasn't budging, she made an odd request. She wanted to come to our aunt's Thanksgiving dinner, just like the rest of the family. This is the same woman who spent her entire life distancing herself from these people, and now she wanted to join us? I had no clue what her angle was, but I agreed to call my aunt and ask. My aunt, being the warm-hearted woman she is, welcomed the idea immediately, even though her sister had neglected her for years and treated her horribly for being, poor. But my mother, of course, always has demands. She expects everyone to cater to her needs immediately, even strangers or little kids who don't understand what she's blabbering about. This will be important later. Thanksgiving Day rolls around, and we all head to my aunt's house. I got there early to help, and my sister and the rest of the family started arriving one by one. Everyone was there except for my mom. Honestly, we thought she wasn't going to show, and we would have celebrated that. But it seems things were about to take a more complicated turn. Mom didn't show up for dinner, so we tried calling her. Her phone was off, so we just carried on without her. Then, out of nowhere, there's a knock on the door. We all looked at each other, wondering who it could be. No one was missing except, of course, my entitled mother. I opened the door, and there she was, standing there shaking, makeup smeared, barely holding herself together. We rushed her inside, wrapped her in a blanket, and gave her a hot drink. Once she calmed down, we asked what on earth had happened. She explained that she had dressed up, got into her fancy car, and driven to our aunt's. But instead of parking on the street like a normal person, she didn't want to park her Mercedes near filthy cars. So, she found a nearby parking lot. When she pulled in, she noticed a car in the corner with some guys inside, smoking whatever they were smoking. Now, here's where her entitlement kicked in. Instead of just walking away, she decided to confront them, demanding they stop what they were doing and leave. Well, these guys weren't exactly the types to take orders from a random woman. They were gang members. They pulled a gun on her, pointing it right at her head. Realizing she was in serious danger, she freaked out, and she wet herself. Apparently, the sight of that made them decide to let her go after taking some of her belongings. That's when my mother finally realized she's not invincible. She can't just go around bossing everyone in the world, especially not in a neighborhood like that. She's lucky she only had a traumatic experience. With her attitude, she could have ended up in a much worse situation. Now, I won't say this changed her completely, it didn't, but she's definitely not as bad as she used to be. Some part of her perspective shifted that day. Hopefully, one day, she'll become someone I can have a normal conversation with. But until that day comes, I'll keep doing what I'm doing, keeping my distance. Story 7. This story happened about 15 years ago. Background. I worked as a firefighter and investigator for an independent department. For reference, the rank of investigator was equivalent to a lieutenant, and I was based out of a large station. We had 2 fire engines, a newer 110-foot tower ladder truck, 1 chief's car, and a utility truck. Every day, cooking duties would rotate among the firefighters, and it just so happened to be my chief's turn to cook when this whole event went down. My friend Bob, the store manager, managed a small grocery store. Outside the store, there was a clearly marked space with a sign that read, "Emergency Vehicles Only." But every week, this entitled jerk with a nice-looking BMW would park there, completely ignoring the sign. Bob had repeatedly told him he couldn't park there. "Bob, you can't park here, it's for emergency vehicles." Entitled jerk, "I can park wherever I want. I make more in a day than you do in a week." Bob called me one day, fed up and complaining about this guy. I agreed to swing by and keep an eye on the spot. I got into our utility truck, which had department decals on the door and a single red light on the dash. When I parked in the emergency vehicle's only spot and started walking inside, I heard someone yell, "You can't park there, that's my special spot." I turned to see the entitled jerk. "Me. Excuse me. I'm on official duties and can park here." I pointed to the decal on my truck. "Entitled jerk. You can't be a firefighter, you're a woman. Move your truck and leave, you insert rude name here." Now, I was proud of my job. In a department of 2 firefighters, I was one of only 5 women. I graduated top of my class, and I wasn't going to let this guy's attitude get to me. After giving him a shocked look, I walked into Bob's office to get more details about this entitled jerk's ongoing parking violations. As Bob explained everything, I noticed a small notice on the fire suppression system, stating an inspection was coming up soon. That gave me an idea. Cue the revenge. I got some additional information from Bob, then headed back to the station. I went straight to my chief's office and told him about the entitled jerk and everything he had said. Now, my chief was a 6'6", 320-pound Samon who treated everyone like family. As I described the situation, his face turned bright red. When I explained my plan, he was all for it. He called a station meeting, and I laid out the idea. The next time the entitled jerk parked in the fire lane, we would send out the trucks to do a fire drill and inspection at the store. The old truck and one engine would head to the store when Bob called. Fast forward 2 weeks. Bob called the station, letting us know that the entitled jerk had just parked in the fire lane again. As I thanked him, I heard the store's fire alarm go off. I quickly changed into my investigator uniform with turnout gear, notified the chief, and sent out the trucks. I rode in the ladder truck. When we arrived, sure enough, the entitled jerk's BMW was sitting right in the emergency vehicle's only spot. I radioed the crew, instructing them to have one engine block the front of the BMW while the ladder truck parked beside the driver's side door. The engineer started setting up the ladder, which meant deploying 4 heavy support struts. One of those struts crushed the hood of the entitled jerk's car. The fire alarm was still blaring, and the lineman smashed the car's windows while running the large 5-inch draft line from the pump through the front seats to connect to the standpipes, the fire access to the sprinkler system. Inside, Bob was rushing people out as the alarm continued to go off. Meanwhile, the entitled jerk ran outside, saw his car, and lost it. I radioed dispatch, requesting police backup as a man was interfering with a fire operation. 3 officers arrived, and I asked them to follow me. Me calling out, "Hey, leave my firefighters alone." The entitled jerk turned and saw me. He rushed up, screaming, "You're going to pay for this. You ruined my car." I calmly told him to leave, or he would be arrested. But he got in my face, yelling, "You did this? I'll have your job for this." Then he shoved me. That was it. The officers and I tackled him to the ground. After they cuffed him, I informed him he was under arrest for assault and interference with a fire investigation. I also told him his car would be towed for parking in a fire lane. Later, I found out it was crushed at the tow yard. In the end, the entitled jerk got 12 months of probation for pushing me and interfering with a fire operation. He was fined $500 for parking in the fire lane, had to cover the cost of the tow, and lost his precious BMW. Moral of the story: don't park where you shouldn't, or bad things will happen.